Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to this, the first meeting of the new Place and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I want to welcome everybody to the committee. In a minute we can probably go around and do some introductions. So we have apologies from absence from Councillors Peter York, Daniel Lister, Michael Stratton and Caroline Phillips. Any others? Thank you. Any declarations of interest? So, minutes. We have two sets of minutes to approve. I'll do the easy one first, which is the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So is there anything on page 1 of those minutes that start present Ian McCord and finishes Chair's announcements? Page 2 starts the Chair noted and finishes with the paragraph 39, the draft report of the Performance Working Group. Or page 3, which priorities 1, 2 and 3. Page 4 starts the Assistant Director and finishes with Revenue Monitoring Position be noted. Or page 5, Committee Draft Annual Plan. So I think, Jonathan, it's just, oh, Fiona, you were maybe at that meeting as well. No, you were an apology. So I think it's just you and me. So are you happy that they're a true, accurate record? So are the committee happy then that I sign these as a true record? Agreed? Thank you. So the second set of minutes that we have to approve is the Place Overview and now, when I looked at the members present at this committee, there's only one member still on the council, which is Alison Eastwood. So I did write to Alison to ask her, was she happy that these minutes were accurate? And she has said she was. So on that basis that there's nobody in the room can challenge them. And I'm not in any way doubting the accuracy of them, Tracy, or your colleagues in committee administration. I will propose that we accept these. Are we happy on that?
Agreed.
Thank you. Both signed. So, item 4, Chairman's announcement. Firstly, can I just thank committee administration for the nameplates? It's all quite useful. It might be useful that we all introduce each other because we won't need to do it every time, but as a lot of us are meeting up for the first time of these particular meetings, and I particularly want, I just spoke to Jeff there, his sign says Jeffrey, he's probably only Jeffrey when he's in trouble. Yeah. So if you do have, the same with Michael, I don't know whether he's a Mike or a Michael, he might well be. So if you do have a preferred name that's suitable for broadcast, by all means, say you prefer to be known as, well, my name's Ian, and my mother chose it because she didn't want it shortened, and I think it'd be very difficult to to shorten it. So I'm the chair of this this group. Kamala?
Yes. My name is Kamala, but I would prefer to be called Karma because I think Kamala Harris has really completely spoiled that for me. So,
I did for that name.
So yeah,
Okay.
Karma, please, and I'm quite happy with that.
Great.
So, Councillor Bocco and I'm the Councillor.
No, that's
I'm Sally Kimmel, I'm leader of the Labour Group and I'm the councillor for Darlington Spencer.
I'm Jonathan Harris, I'm the leader of the Lib Dem Group and the councillor for Britswood.
Councillor Dave Gaskell, it says David, I prefer Dave personally. Kingsthorpe South, thanks.
Tracy Cliff, Democratic Services. Marina Watkins, Democratic Services.
Jeff Johnson, Councillor for Blackthorn and Braintree Farm.
Fiona Unett, I'm the Assistant Director for Waste here in place of Stuart Timmis.
Martin Henry, Executive Director of Resources.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Fiona Unett, I'm the Assistant Director for Waste in place of Stuart Timmis, who would normally be here.
Thanks. That just actually clarified for me after 4 years how to actually say your surname.
Right, I answered to most things.
Well, thank you for that. Martin, did you introduce yourself? You did, yeah, sorry.
Martin Henry, Executive Director of Resources.
My mistake. So, I don't have any further announcements to make. If anybody does wish to jump in, just do it. I try to keep things informal if we can, but I like to try to keep things moving as well. But we don't have a heavy agenda tonight, so we should have plenty of time. So the remit of the Place and Overview Committee. Who's doing? Is that something Tracy's doing? Right.
Thank you, Chair. You had a report with your agenda pack. It just states the remits of the 3 overview and scrutiny committees, and in bold it gives the remit of Place and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which I'll just highlight. It's Finance, Resources and Shared Services, Environment, Transport and Highways, Economic Development, Regeneration and Growth, and the statutory scrutiny of flood and risk management. I haven't got anything to add to that because it's all in the report. If you've got any questions.
You look like you're going to say something, Jonathan.
Just a small remit was
Well,
okay, but
yes. There's a lot rolled into a few words there.
indeed, yeah.
Can I ask something about the way the committee works?
Crack on.
Yeah, because obviously finances is kind of, shall I put this on?
Yeah.
Finances is cross-cutting, so I imagine that some of the work of this committee is either done in partnership with some of the other scrutiny committees, is it? Particularly in relation to some of the high spending areas which threaten to overspend, like adult social care and children's services, and how I take it that's the case, and then we set up joint working in that in those instances. Is that right?
Where we want to. We have the triangulation committee as well to try and make sure that there's not duplication of effort. And we have in the past, and that doesn't mean we have to carry on, but we have in the past set up joint working. We had one on highways between the Place and the Old Resources Committee. I've in the past, and I would still to an extent resist, we need to be very careful with the resources side because everything's got a pound sign attached to it. So we could, if we wanted to, say everything in the other 2 columns belong to us as well because they all have to be paid for. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is. So if you take something like, if you wanted to look at something like the cost of placements in care for either children or adults, I was just said to Cam earlier that I think as a committee it might be something you'd want to do jointly, because we might only want to focus on the pounds and pence, and others might just say the money doesn't matter. What matters is that you have to provide a high standard of care to that person, and there probably has to be a happy balance found somewhere between those 2 extremes of hang the cost, we just have to do it, and the only thing that matters is the cost. So I can see, and that's not to say that everybody in here has only got one view and everybody in the other committee has only got a separate view. So we can, but I'm personally always a little nervous about going too far into the remits of the other committees just because it happens to have a pound sign attached. We just need to be careful on that one. But we have enough. We also will have, as part of our sort of natural rhythm, I'm assuming we will still get the quarterly updates on budget monitoring, on performance monitoring, and then probably by maybe next meeting, but certainly by October, we'll be into the budget setting process and looking at, and certainly early New Year, and I think we've scheduled them now this year, haven't we, Tracy? Early New Year, we will have a budget scrutiny session as well. So, and something probably to bear in mind whenever we get onto the work plan setting, we need to remember there's going to be a chunk of time between December and February where we're going to be focused on the budget. So we probably need something to keep us busy to Christmas and then something to keep us busy post budget. But we do need to just bear that in mind, whatever we're going to do later, that there's a natural rhythm to this committee that probably the other ones, I don't think the other ones have the same sort of, or at least the others that used to exist had the same sort of structure that we would have had, because they just get quarterly reports on this and that. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that there's quite a lot of big items coming up which have got a service side and have got a financial side, and sometimes you know, two pairs of eyes coming at it from a different perspective can actually help to unlock both the services and the finances to an extent. And thinking about like the housing in particular, which is coming up, which has got real financial implications. Are you minded to sort of look at some of those big ticket items, or are you saying leave those and just take them up during the ordinary
That's a matter for the
cycle?
committee.
Okay.
Where the committee wants to go is not what I want to do.
Okay.
It's where the committee wants to head. But if we were going to look at housing, then we would probably need to be working, I would think, with some sort of joint working group with the other committee. I would have
That's
thought.
answered my question.
Yeah, I would have thought
Yeah.
so. That would, because you would have to balance both
Yeah.
of them.
And what we've
Fiona.
done in years gone past is when we've been looking at the work plans, seeing where might there be some crossover in
Yeah.
the work plans. We can have that conversation with other committees now and say, well, actually, we're thinking this. Are you planning on putting that on your work plan? Actually, if there is, then there can be that crossover.
Yeah.
Let's have those conversations up front.
Yeah.
But I think that's the time that it can really be useful if we know that there is that crossover, and then rather than as we get through it say, well, can we work with you on this now, or are you looking at that? So I bring it up front.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It is, yes, we have.
Sorry, Martin.
We have.
I think the other thing to highlight is when we do budget setting, we get into detailed sessions on budget setting, and we pick specific areas to have a look at, and that's quite often the highest spending areas. So we've looked on the UK Children's Trust previously, we looked at adult social care previously, and that comes up as part of the detailed budget setting process, which you have a fundamental role in shaping when we get into late autumn, early winter.
I was just going to add to that. I think, thinking back over the last 4 years, probably one of the things that we could do better is be ahead of the curve for forward plan. You know, we tended to be dealing with stuff that was sort of a bit rear view in some instances. Having looked at the forward plan, there's some really big ticket items coming up, but actually for the 24th of June, it seems quite a lot going to Cabinet then. So it's whether there's anything that falls out from that, because I think the MPH issue, for instance, is on that Cabinet agenda, or likely to be. But I think that's probably what I would also just add, is I think we just need to keep ahead on that rolling forward plan.
Yeah, well, I think there might
your
be a
point
bit of
about the budget issue. Yeah.
I think there might be a bit of a bubble in the pipe with the election and change of control and whatever, that things will now start getting in. You're not really going to say something, Dave?
No.
Okay.
I'm just listening.
No, well, feel free to jump in. Are there anything else then on the remit of what we have? Because I think, well, really, unless it's adults or children's, then the rest of it's ours, isn't it? Like it's rather, well, the housing bit as well sits the other side. But I think one of the things that we're going to have to watch and maybe give it a year and see is how well this committee can actually cope with that, and how we actually feel honestly that we're doing it. Because we had 4 committees. Well, let's get this right. In 2021, we had 3 committees, which was, I think, people, place and resources. And then we did a scrutiny review, and one of the things they recommended was that children and adults needed to be split. So we set up 4 committees, which were children's, adults, place and resources. And then just at the last council meeting, who are you subbing for?
Oh, I thought this was training course.
No.
No, sorry. Cheers.
Well, you're welcome to stay.
Oh, good, thanks.
Oh, was it something I said? Because he is one of the subs. But I don't think he's booked himself on for one of his colleagues that aren't here. It's too late now, isn't it? You have to do it half an hour before the meeting starts.
We need to put it in writing.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
You were explaining we have 4.
So we had the 4. We've now come back to 3 and rolling place and resources into 1, leaving children's and adults. So it is something we will have to watch as a committee as to whether or not we can do the workload, or whether or not we end up allowing things that we really want to look at have to drop just because we don't have the time and the resource to do it, or whether we should be meeting more frequently, which is another bugbear of some that's come up. So it's something I think as a committee we're going to have to just play by ear through the year and just say, and I don't mind a very frank and honest conversation to say this isn't working, we need more time, or we need more meetings, or we should, and again it's sort of up to the administration, once they get things going they may well decide to go back to a different structure. That'll be entirely up to them, but I think this one concerns me that we're going to do it.
I am supposed to be here, so sorry. All my admin's gone wrong.
Oh, you're
being late.
that's all right. You're subbing for one of your colleagues. Which one? Well, you can sit over here. Which one? Okay, doesn't matter.
Couldn't get out of work, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Right.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course, crack on.
Thank you. About this is about under environment, and that presumably includes some of the big environmental contracts. And I think, am I right saying that the refuse contract, isn't it, comes up? Yeah, so...
Well, we got 2.5 contracts, don't we? Depends how you view the in-house.
Yeah.
So we got the Veolia one for the former borough, Norse for the former Daventry, and in-house for the former South Northants.
I mean,
And Fiona knows all about them.
yeah, time can go by obviously very quickly, can't it? And it's an issue about is it going to be possible to scrutinise what's happening here before the new contract goes? Because otherwise, you end up with a new contract and then you scrutinise after the event.
Yeah.
It's then too late.
Well, I think the former police committee did do a bit of work on that, trying to get ahead of that one. All right, yeah, crack on. Well, you're the expert on it, so.
So you're absolutely right. The new contracts, the existing arrangements will end in 2028, and we are already looking ahead to the new arrangements, whatever they might be. They may be new contracts, they may be an in-house service. And because we need to allow sufficient time for implementation, we are already started the review. Now, this year, obviously, we were really waiting till we had our new members in place, but we would very much welcome member involvement. And it was going to be it's on one of the slides to suggest that we set up a member working group, either affiliated with Scrutiny or not. I have already flagged it with the leader. So it's, again, I'm sure the chair will agree, it's up for discussion as one of the options.
We're going to come on to that.
We are.
Okay, right. Okay. All right, yeah, so just keep your powder dry for a moment. Anything else on the remit? We're all kind of clear as to what we're trying to do. Well.
Just one other point. We got into a fairly good routine in the last year in particular of having pre-meets, not committees, but offline, or online I should say, but offline from the committee. And actually I think that proved to be quite helpful on some of the topics that we were discussing, because it enabled the committee to explore reports or outputs or commentary before it got to full debate and discussion and decision making. So your comment about will there be sufficient meetings, if you include those, that might well help, but if you don't include those, I think it'd be a challenge.
Yeah. And can I just say, particularly to the newly elected members, do not just worry about the fact that what Jonathan, myself and Fiona used to be on here say this is what we used to do. More than happy for you to say, well, change it, because sometimes looking at something completely differently is what we actually need. So it'll not offend me. You'll do well to offend me on anything, but it'll not offend me at all for people to say, why are you doing that? Wouldn't it be a good idea to change it? This whole overview and scrutiny should be about constructive challenge, and that should also mean challenging ourselves. So, yeah, I'm more than up for that. So I don't think there's much else we can say on the remit. It is what it is, and we just need to keep a watching brief on it that we can cover it all. So item 6 then, key priorities, risks and challenges. We have a couple of slides. I think Fiona's going first and then Martin. Okay. You ready there, Tracy? Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. We thought it would be helpful for the first slide just to share with you some of the work that had previously been done by Scrutiny. And Stuart's asked me to explain that it's been a broad range of things, including from policy and strategies, which might have included the local plan as an example, through to the highways maintenance contract and other initiatives, including the VOI, e-scooters and some community safety issues. So because those have already been looked at, you may prefer to look at something new. But of course, again, that's your prerogative. So on the next slide, what Stuart's done is just set out some of the upcoming pieces of work that there is an opportunity to influence now. So really, Stuart suggested that we look at areas where you could make a change and you could have that input. So at the top there, we've got strategies, and Stuart's listed the local plan, the estate strategy, community safety, air quality and flooding. All of those are strategies that are in development that you may want to have a look at. And then there's the contractual side of what we do. So Place is a very diverse directorate in terms of the services that we offer. So in terms of contracts, there's the highways contract, the maintenance and the monitoring, the maintenance contract with Kia. I believe the monitoring of that contract specifically has previously been looked at by Scrutiny, but there may be another aspect that you'd like to look at. However, what you perhaps need to recognise is the discretion to change things. So you can't necessarily change the contract. So if you were to drill down into something that's already existing, you might want to focus on an aspect that is possible to change. The environmental services, including waste collection and cleansing. So we've just mentioned that. It includes within scope all of the collection services, two of which we currently work in 3 geographic areas. So we've got Veolia in Northampton, we've got Norse that currently deliver services in Daventry, and we've got the in-house service in South. And what we'd like to look at is the opportunity to harmonise those services under one arrangement for West North Ants, which will commence in 2028 when the existing arrangement ends. And then also within scope of those environmental services are the cleansing part of the service as well. And the time to input into that is really now, when you can make a change. Yeah. So that we can make a recommendation to Cabinet early next year. I should just clarify that once we get into procurement, it's monitoring officer advice that we normally don't allow member involvement, because then it increases the risk significantly of challenge. So as I say, the opportunity is perhaps now, and I would very much welcome member involvement. We previously had a cross-party members working group to help develop the waste strategy. We made sure that all 3 geographic areas were represented, and we made sure that all political parties were represented. So it was very inclusive, and we ended up with a strategy, I think, that went through Cabinet. Everybody was relatively comfortable with that, and I would like to get to the same position where we can make a recommendation to Cabinet that members genuinely sign up to. So that's another opportunity. Then next on the list, there's a lot of regeneration and placemaking, both plans and also the schemes that then come out of that in terms of the regeneration opportunities. Moving back onto highways, there's some active travel schemes which are in development, and the higher plans, the transport plan, has already gone through Cabinet, but then drilling down into that at a more local level, there's plans that members could also look at. And then there's opportunities for service improvement. So where we have services such as planning or building control or car parking or tourism, which are normally provided directly by the council, there are opportunities there for service improvement as well. So in terms of, just to sort of conclude, as I say, it is a very diverse directorate. There's lots of ideas there. I'm sure you've got your own ideas, and these by no means are the only ideas on the table. And as I say, rather than looking back at things that might have already been scrutinised, you may choose to look forward and look at things where you can have a genuine input. Thank you.
Any questions for Fiona? No, if there was particular questions about anything she said, and then we can have a discussion, that was all.
Could you set out some kind of timelines for discussion about the contract, how that would look, what kind of form it would take?
A waste contract.
Yeah.
So we really need to be in a position where we've concluded the review this calendar year so that we can make a recommendation to Cabinet early next year. And the reason why we're on that timeline is because if we do decide to go out and procure a contract, it will be a complicated contract to procure, and we need to allow sufficient time to mobilise that contract so that we have that seamless service delivery, because none of us want any interruption to the waste services. So we just need to allow plenty of time for the implementation phase.
So does Veolia and Norse have the same end date?
Yes, June 2028.
Okay, well that's helpful. Right, okay.
So
working back from that, you probably need, if you're going to switch provider or bring it in-house, you would need 12 months?
I think we'd need 2 years. We've
2 years?
Yeah, we've just recently...
So you're out of time already?
No,
you're going
because
to need
it's
a good
2026.
Yeah, 26.
June 2026.
Sorry, June 2026 is when
We would need to really be starting the procurement.
to
So
run, but that'll take 6-9 months.
So the procurement will take at least 12 months.
Yeah,
so,
I would have thought so.
And then we need to allow 6 months mobilisation at least. So we're looking at somewhere between an 18-month to 2-year programme for implementation, which is why we're aiming to get to
Yeah, so you
Cabinet
need
with
to
a
have a
recommendation.
decision. It needs to be placed by June 26.
Yes. Yes. Sorry, I could have set that out on a slide and I've not.
That's
It would
okay.
have been
So we
clearer.
start, you want to write a purchase order or not, or give notice. I don't know what the notice is, but you might have to at least, if not give notice formally, but at least advise someone that the contract will not be renewed. And that then needs to be managed, but that will be a separate,
It would have to be a priority for us to do.
yeah. Well, depending on, you know, if a contractor knew they weren't going to be renewed, it's very difficult then to hold them to a service level.
You mean the work, don't you? You mean in terms of putting on the agenda?
Yeah. So if we were going to look at that, and it's really a strategic thing, we want to try to get a couple of fences down the track, don't you? And see, but in-house versus out-of-house, I think will be the first big debate to be had. And what does that all look like? And what are the costs and the benefits and all the rest of it?
Can I ask you, Chair, Fiona, you mentioned some work has been done on this already. Is there some output from that that can be shared?
Not quite yet. So what we've done is we've commissioned 3 work streams looking at the specification because, as I say, very much would like member input. So we're looking to gather that evidence, given that we knew we couldn't start meeting with members until the second part of this year. So we've been gathering the evidence so that it will be ready. I think the first work package is due to start delivering about August, but we've been commissioning those in phases. So we'd like to get everybody up to speed, first of all. They'd be the first meetings, and then we'd be looking to share that evidence so that we can have a discussion about which
So where are we
want
with
to go in.
regulatory changes? Because there's talk about 3 weekly black, and then there's talk about government are going to prevent 3 weekly black. So does anybody know what government thinks today?
So Government have said it's a local decision in terms of frequency of residual waste collection. What we need to do as part of the review is look at how it's going to be delivered, and you've just identified two of the main ones, in-house or contracted. There might be an in-between option like a joint venture or a TECL. And there's also the specification. So we need to have a look at how frequently things are collected, bin sizes. There's small differences between the different geographic areas that we do need to have a look at.
And where we tip? Because I know it's a system. It's not actually a contract. The whole thing's just, I remember doing this at South Northants, and where we tip was important because that impacted the actual specification of the bin lorry.
It does.
It was all a bit strange that if you were tipping in some place that had concrete stuff, they could do something, but if it was going on softer ground, it needed a different axle.
And equally in terms of recycling, because we use two different sources for that. So
I don't know what the arrangements are for the green waste, because again, the South Northants one was a farmer down in Helmden doing it. Now, whether that person could cope with the whole of the borough, the whole of the district.
So we're definitely getting into the detail now.
Yeah, we are. We're diving down rabbit holes here.
In terms of residual waste, those outlets are secured, but in terms of the other offtake contracts for the other materials, they again would be something that we need to look at.
Okay. And then there's the whole stuff around what technologies as well. If you were going to do it, electric v
that almost
diesel
v. Should be on the plan.
Yeah.
It's the timing issue.
I agree with you. We just need to be a wee bit careful before we say that, because we'll end up at the moment doing the next item quickly and saying that's a priority, that's a priority, that's a priority, and everything will become a priority. We might need to have that discussion just in a minute. But I agree with you. I think it feels to me like it should be there. But
is this one including? How about fly tipping and litter picking in that contract?
So
what's the timeline for that?
That's all part
it's all
of
rolled
the
in.
yes. It's
and is it the same for Norse?
Part of it. Yes, cleansing forms part of it.
So cleansing is what we would call street cleaning.
Yes.
And fly tip collections.
Because that's probably the one that's almost more controversial, isn't it? That one. I mean, I know there's issues about waste, the refuse collection too, but in terms of public complaints, it's the fly tipping and the litter picking that gets people frothing around, isn't it?
So it's all
well,
part
look, you know,
of
a
the
question
same.
I would like to know is, could a South Northants in-house go into town and just pick something up, or would that upset Veolia?
It won't upset Veolia, but then, of course, we're not necessarily... Veolia are being paid to deliver that service. So what we need to do is... We are already in discussion.
Yeah, but we just back charge them then. Are they in... It's a matter, are they in charge? Are they in... You know, because I've been on the receiving end of emails from irate residents who sent them, not just to me, like to lots of people, and said, we reported this a week ago, 3 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, and it hasn't been picked up, which said to me there's something going on there. So
there's two different elements to what you're talking about. There's the existing contract and then there's the future contract.
Yeah.
The existing
the
arrangements we can, of course, look at as well. I'm already in discussion with the Cabinet member on that.
But it just seemed to me, you know, you just said to the guys at Tove, go and pick it up, and we just send the bill back to the person who should have picked it up within their SLA.
We can only work within the contractual mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Is it a foregone conclusion that the two contracts remain as one moving forward? Because they're quite... And do other councils tend to have them all rolled together? Because there's different levels of, as I said, public anger about each of them. And in a sense, they're slightly different in terms of the nature of the work as well.
Yeah.
You're right that West Northants is very diverse demographically, but for an area of this size, normally it would be one joint contract because of parity for residents. So residents would like to receive equivalent services because they're all paying.
Sorry, I didn't mean geographically, I meant in terms of functions.
Oh.
The refuse removal and the litter picking, fly tipping, are those always combined? Or
They are.
Can they be separated out?
They are normally combined. However, it is a question that we are looking at as officers as well. Actually, what would be the benefit for separating out those services?
But that would be something that we could do in scrutiny,
yes.
To say, you know, why is it that we, you know, you lump it all together? Should you keep the street cleaning in-house, the litter picking in-house? why do we employ somebody to give out tickets for dog filing? Don't know why we don't have that in-house. Fiona?
So I know that going back a couple of years ago, there was, we were talking about flighting. It wasn't possible at the time within the budget to know how much was actually being spent on flighting, on the collection, because it was just all wrapped up in one lump sum. I don't know if that's still the case. It's probably not to get into at this particular juncture, but I think one thing for scrutiny is the transparency. And it might be there now, and if it is, apologies, but I think that is something that is important, that the transparency on how the money is being spent on whether it's cleansing and whether it's refuse.
Yeah, well, like the last time we were on course for about 20,000 fly tips a year.
Yeah, but we couldn't at the time, maybe you can confirm if we can now, actually know how much money is being spent on fly tipping collection because it was just wrapped up in the whole budget.
I know how much money is spent on the cleansing part of the service compared with the collection part of the service, but the cleansing crew do lots of different types of work. They don't just collect fly tips, they do routine cleansing as well.
And that's the issue, isn't it, when we're looking at, well, do we open the refuse centres for longer or X, Y, and Z? And we're saying, well, that's too expensive. Well, how do we know what's too expensive? Or how do we know what's the best way to go until we actually know what is the cost of that fly tipping clean-up operation? I think that's a really important part that we do actually scrutinise.
Yeah. And we're all in danger of doing it now, so we just need to be a little careful. Anything else on there that you think might be... just trying to think.
The regeneration stuff is really interesting.
Yes.
Obviously for Northampton, I feel really passionate about that because Northampton is really the driver of the local economy, but it should be wider as well. But also there's some really important ancillary areas that desperately need regeneration, like in my patch of Darrington Spencer, like King's Heath Shopping Centre. There's a lot of local shopping centres dotted around Northampton, which are desperately in need of regeneration. There's Kettering Road, the bottom of Kettering Road, which is the entry to Northampton, which is a complete disgrace in kind of design and planning terms, and it could be a really exciting, vibrant shopping area. So there's quite a lot that needs doing, other than, everybody thinks about the Market Square, obviously it's a tight profile, but there's a lot else, and I'm sure people from Toasters think the same, although I would just say that, Minewood alone is got as many people in it, almost as Bradley, so there's some real challenges about some of the out-of-town suburban areas here.
I mean, Daventry, there was an emerging plan which was very much hooked on Eastern Way, which obviously Eastern Way has now come back out of the equation. So any of the redevelopment that was planned for that was very much linked to the housing development that was proposed there. So I think the short answer is it should be in the mix, but again, it's another big issue.
And Mike, sorry, Fiona.
There's one more in terms of tourism events, and again, I hate harking back to the past because we are now, but also looking at just some concerns that you raised a couple of scrutinies ago when we had presented to us the music festival at Delabray, and you were there as well. And I think we sat there quite horrified at the cost that it had been, and when we asked, but what was the objective behind it? What's the rationale, and what's the strategic? How does this sit in the strategic element?
That was the harder thing to pin down.
And events, and yet the director couldn't answer that question. They just said, "Oh, it's just because we're planning on making Northampton a music festival."
That's still outstanding.
And we were just, where's this come from? And I think it's really important if we are really looking at sort of putting on some of those high-profile events. First of all, it's not just Northampton-centric, but also secondly, where is this sitting within the wider strategic growth plan for West Northants? Because otherwise I think we could end up spending a lot of money on some items which don't necessarily help us achieve an overall objective.
Yeah, and how do we pick them, I think, was also something we were, how do you judge a cycling one to invest in against the women's rugby, against Party in the Park, a concert? Now, there's probably different audiences for all three of those, and it doesn't make them right or wrong, but it was very difficult to pin down what was the criteria being used to assess them, and what success was going to be measured by. It was really difficult. It was easier to nail jelly to the wall.
And if we're looking at resident value in all of this, which is essentially what we are looking at. And what is it that they want as well, and there hadn't been consultation on that element, so I just think that's the thing.
So on the regeneration and the town plant, I don't know if there's a specific Northampton town brief. There used to be a Brackley town brief and there used to be a Toaster one, but they're probably now 15 years old and they're probably to a large extent built out. I think there was one going through for Daventry not that long back. So is that about refreshing the Toaster and the Brackley ones, or is that about starting again, or what?
Forgive me, I'm not able to answer that. That might be a question that I'll need to ask Stuart and come back to you on.
That's all right.
I think there's been quite a few goes in Northampton, but I think one of the problems is that everywhere else around about has moved faster than Northampton, and there's some areas that have been impacted obviously by Western Lakes.
Yeah.
There's the Western Bagel Shopping Centre. I mean, that was due for the wholesale regeneration, and that just seems to have disappeared off. So.
They also, of course, link, don't they, to the wider issue of the local plan, because it's part of the local plan. And on the local plan, that also sits to some extent in planning policy. The challenge with that is it's an executive committee, so, there's always debate about not having voting rights for those that aren't on executive in that particular committee. But that's probably the main steer of the local plan. And actually, I wonder whether there is something separate, which is a cross-party steering group on local plan. Almost.
Now you are going to get me started.
I tried to, so.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the local plan development via the policy route that we do at the moment is wholly wrong. But anyway. But my concern has always been what is the strategy, particularly for Northampton, because it almost looks at times like it was a real life game of Monopoly. Let's buy the church and the pub and the Rennie McIntosh building and M&S building, but what's the common thread that links them all together? And the only one I can find is every single one of those plots had a problem. One was stuffed full of asbestos, one needed to be knocked down, one's a scheduled ancient monument, one's a Grade 2 listed building. But I have often struggled to get that bigger view to say what you're trying to do here, and I still at times struggle.
I think it's fair to say that just to everybody, this is something that predates a number of people in this room, isn't it? Some of the things that we've been looking at
Predates everyone.
The last 4 years of this council as it is now. There's some inherited things from sort of going back 10 or so years ago that we've been trying to normalise to some extent, isn't it?
Yes, but to some extent though, Fiona, the first 4 years, irrespective of political control, the first 4 years, the council, it needed a little bit of time to actually get itself together, to understand what the hell West Northants Council was about, and also bearing in mind that was also the log shadow of COVID was still hanging over it, and getting out of that. We should now be in a position where West Northants Council is established. It's gone to, past the toddler stage, and now should be standing on its own 2 feet and able to move forward, irrespective of change of political control. The organisation's a lot more settled. We were having this discussion as the first meeting of the new Resources Committee the first time round. Most people were still trying to work out, where their desk was, what they were trying to do. So it was all.
It is, but I think now is a really good time.
Yes.
So you say you've got through that. I think we've even been seeing, even up till maybe 12 months ago, skeletons coming out of the closet from the legacy councils coming together. So I think that can't be undermined, that it's really sort of probably only been the last 12 months you go, okay, so this is where we're at to be able to take it forward. So I think that it's a good time now to pick maybe some of those elements and look at it.
Well, I think you could probably pick up everything that's on that list. We just need to be careful. Like local plan, they've already published the development scheme for that. That should be on for
autumn Reg 18.
Yeah, so we should have another, you know, and my big gripe with this is what can you actually do in council? Ultimately, the local plan belongs to the council, but if you try to stick an amendment down, I've asked the question, I never had an answer, to say I want to strike out some paragraph on page 215. Are you going to be able to in full council, or are you going to be told, oh, well, you better go back down through all the loop? Yeah, you can only do it if it's been approved by planning policy and in turn approved by cabinet and in turn approved, you know. So, but yeah, I think members in general, the local plan I think needs its own separate thing that's members in general are doing. Some love planning, some hate planning, but I think everybody should take an interest in it because things can happen in your backyard if you're not careful about.
Yeah, and the briefings that we have are not sufficient in their own right, because that's at a point when there's information to share and it's not worked on a continuing
Well, you know,
basis.
we've seen cases of members complaining about the fact that there was a planning application goes in within their ward on a site that they voted to have included in the local plan. Work that one out. So it does happen. But, okay, so just we'll hold that in mind because we're going to come on to developing our own work programme. We've got Martin now to tell us about the other side of things.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. I think there's about 4 or 5 slides for me to go through. Some of these you will have seen if you've been on the local government finance training session or on the member information day, but there's just some key points that I just want to remake, I guess, as part of this presentation. The first one is what's in front of you, and I think it goes back to what Fiona was talking about earlier in terms of where we've come from, what we inherited, and how we've managed the finances so far. And I think on that one slide, we can, the column in the middle sets out the net budget that's been set for the general fund account, essentially the council tax account, and where we came out at the end of the year, so what the variance was. So you can see in year 1, 2021-22, the net budget was 326 million, and we underspent by 110,000. So in percentage variance terms, a very small underspend. And again, that flows.
In this respect, the minus numbers are good. That's
Yes,
an underspend.
Yeah. So minus is good, brackets are good. But yeah, that kind of flows through the rest of that table. So you can see there was a small overspend in year 2 against a £342 million budget. There was a small underspend, very small underspend in year 3 against a £384 million budget. 24-25, we've provisionally closed the accounts. We've got a report that's heading towards Cabinet at the end of June, on the 24th of June. That report currently is showing a 390,000 underspend against a £414 million budget. For this year, we've got £430 million net budget, which we are monitoring against. Ian talked about the kind of standard reports that come back here. So you will get the quarterly budget monitoring report when that's published. Sometimes the timings don't work, so if the timings don't work, you'll ordinarily get a verbal update from me in terms of where we are based on the latest information that we've got, and we feed that into this committee. So that's one of the key reports that you look at and give views and come to conclusions on. So that comes in as a matter of course as part of these meetings if you are happy for that to continue. If we can just go to the next slide. This is really important because this is reserves and the amount of reserves that we've got, and the reserves are split into 3 different elements. You've got the general fund reserve, which is your contingency of last resort. So if everything else has been spent and allocated and there's been overspend, for example, and we have used every other earmarked reserve or ring-fence reserve or any other types of financing that expenditure, you would then have to fall back on your general fund balances. And your general fund balances, as I say, are your contingency of last resort. So I will always give advice that seeks to protect and preserve general fund balances. When we get to the end of a financial year, sometimes we look at how we need to finance some expenditure, because if we didn't finance it in a particular way, we might show an overspend. And therefore, I will make decisions around how or I'll make recommendations about how we finance some of that expenditure, which can include capitalising costs that are in the revenue account, just to make sure that, really importantly, we protect those general fund balances as much as possible, because if they start dwindling and diminishing and essentially eventually run out because they're a one-off fund, then that does signal that you're in financial distress. Our general fund, you'll see it on the next slide in a second, has stabilised, but I'll come on to that in a minute. You've then got earmarked reserves. They're set aside for particular projects and for particular reasons. There is a detailed spreadsheet which lists out all of those earmarked reserves. So again, if you had an interest in that and you wanted to go through those and just question the validity of them or whether they're still required or if they're at the right level, then that information could come in here. And then you also have ring-fence reserves of about 15 million, and that's things like public health reserves, which can only be spent on very, very specific things, and the auditors will crawl over what we charge into public health reserves and those ring-fence reserves. So we need to be really careful about making sure that's only eligible spend that's allocated to those reserves. So in total, if you look at the reserve side of things, there's about £100 million left at the end of the last financial year. Just flick on to the next slide. This goes back to general fund balances, and the blue line is where general fund balances are currently sat. So when we became West Northampton Council on the 1st of April 2021, there was about £40 million of general fund balances. A conscious decision was taken to use £5 million of that as part of budget setting for 22-23. So that's why it dipped down to 35 million, because that conscious decision to set that one-off budget up was required in that financial year. So that's why it came down to 35 million. And then since then, it's gone up slightly. So we've actually not had to rely on general fund balances going forward. We should never have an ongoing rely on general fund balances because that signals financial trouble. And as you can see, we've topped up a little bit. So we're now up to about 36 million in general fund balances. The orange bar is showing the recommended level of balances. Now, that is a judgment that I take. So when we put the final budget together, I make a recommendation in terms of what our general fund balances should be. I have to formally set that out in something called a Section 25 statement, which goes into the final budget papers. And the orange bar is the level of recommended general fund balance that I've recommended for the first 4 years. So you can see the blue bar is significantly above that, which illustrates that we've got more than the minimum recommended amount. The other thing that we do is we compare ourselves to other similar local authorities, similar unitary authorities, in terms of whether our general fund balances are low compared to others, high compared to others, or somewhere in the middle. And they are relatively, they're not the highest level of general fund balances. They are slightly above average in terms of level of general fund balances compared to our nearest neighbour authorities and compared to their net budget as a percentage of what the general fund balances are. So hopefully that will give you some assurance that actually the general fund balances have stabilised. We don't continue to rely on them at this point in time. It's always a consideration when you set the budget that you can take a view on whether general fund balances should be used or not to balance the budget. If you do begin relying on general fund balances, then you absolutely need to have a strategic plan to move that reliance away from those funds, because as soon as they've spent, as I've said before, you trigger almost a Section 114 situation, because that would signal that you run out of funds. So it's just really important to highlight they're above the minimum recommended level at the moment. They have stabilised over the last 4 years and are at a reasonably good level. Just go on to the next slide. If I just give you an early indication of 25-26, because this is really symptomatic of the first 4 years, I think. We run a whole range of services, as you're aware. We have statutory responsibilities to run those services in most cases. And we have had, apart from the first year, which actually there wasn't too much pressure coming forward in the first year, but the years after that, the demand-led services then caused a lot of pressure for us to be able to manage. And I think in every year we have had those particular pressures coming forward, particularly in adult social care and children's social care. You take just those two services on their own and they account for about 60% of our budget. So if there is an issue in adult social care and children's social care and they're coming together at the same time, that's tying up at least 60% of your budget. If you have an overspend on that budget, it's the other services then have to come in and have to try to bring that spend back into line, so as an authority, we're not overspending. In previous years, we've also done really painful things like spending restriction panels, where what it looked like we were overspending in the second year, we started that pretty early in the year. And if anybody wanted to spend more than £500 on anything, they had to put a business case together, and that detail had to come into a panel that we ran every Friday morning to run through that level of detail, just to make sure that we were absolutely convinced that it was being spent on essential expenditure only. So that's the type of thing that we do when we know that we've got budget pressures coming forward. We still have an approval to recruit process, so every vacant post that comes up we scrutinise in detail. We encourage people not to ask for those posts to be filled unless they feel it's absolutely necessary, and then we go through the process of seeing if we agree with that, with those submissions that have come in or not. And again, that's just another mechanism to try and control the spend that we've got. If we look at 25-26, we have about £11.5 million of contingency left. We are seeing pressure coming forward again in adult social care and children's social care, driven in both of those areas, some of it being driven by the national insurance increases that we saw, which then have flowed through into the provision of services, but also a general continued increase in the level of demand for those services, and it's causing pressure on those services again. I do have a figure for the period one position. I'm not going to quote that figure tonight, because what we heard for period one was these are all the pressures that we want to make you aware of. What we've now asked the organisation to do and budget holders to do is come back with these. Okay, these are the pressures, but what mitigations are there to offset those pressures, so we get a more realistic net position. What it does demonstrate is there is already pressure on the contingency, and in actual fact the pressures that are being flagged are in excess of the contingency that we hold, which is why it's really important now to get to that next stage of, so what mitigations are going to come forward to help to offset some of those pressures that we're seeing already. It's the demand-led services again. It's adult social care, it's children's social care. That's where we're seeing the biggest pressure this early in the financial year. What we do when we get to those mitigated pressures and we have the overall net pressure, we then determine corporately how we look to manage that for the rest of the financial year, considering again things like spending restriction panels and if there's anything else we need to do to try and bring it back into balance. But it is without a doubt going to be another tough financial year. I think it's only right for me to flag at this stage. I think the last, including this year, but the last 4 years have been tough because we have had those types of pressures coming forward each year. We seek to correct the base budget each year when we set the new budget, but then the demand or the inflation or some external factors outstrip the assumptions that we built into those budgets, and quite often we've started the year seeing that we've got a financial problem that we need to address, and again it looks challenging for 25-26. This committee has a role in that in terms of just understanding those pressures and what's generating those pressures, understanding the process that we bring in to try and manage those pressures, and come up with any other good ideas to make sure that we keep on top of the finances. But I would go back to the previous slide that I showed, the first slide that I showed. So far, so good. It's been really, really painful for the last 4 years, but we've always managed to bring it back into line and back into balance by each of the end of those financial years. Just go on to the next slide. This is all public information. So this information, and it's a little bit small, but this information was formed part of the final budget papers that went into full council in February. And this sets out the medium-term financial plan. The table shows in the first column that in 25-26, after we'd been through the detailed budget setting process, we estimated the net budget would be 432 million, and the total funding coming in we expected to be 432 million, therefore demonstrating a balanced budget for 25-26. We then, at the same time, when we set that budget in February, look forward, look at the assumptions that we've got, look at what demand's doing, make assumptions on things like council tax, which are still subject to political consideration, so I will come back to that in a second, and any of the grant income we receive and any other income coming in. We make assumptions on things like pay inflation, the cost of increments if people aren't at the top of the grade, and that gives us a revised estimate of what we think if the level of service stayed the same, what we think those costs of services would be. So for 26-27, we think the cost of services, when we did that exercise, would be about 464 million. And when we rolled forward the income streams, they came to about 438 million. So there was already a deficit that we're predicting for next year in 26-27 of about £26 million, which represents about 6% of the total net budget. If you then, just 2 more points on this, if you then add to that the pressures that we're seeing in this year, I think inevitably that 26 million will go up because demand has increased. We have the pressures that I talked about on the last slide, so I think it would be greater than the 26 million pounds as a starting point. Those figures are being refreshed as I speak, so we should have a better idea of what we think the starting position will be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And again, we'd bring that back into here as probably a confidential session to take you through that level of detail and that information, so we can see what the starting position is. And then we move into the options that we look at to try and bring that back into balance and to ensure we have a balanced budget when we set the budget in February of next year. Fundamental to that would be things like level of council tax. So within these figures, there is an assumption that council tax will increase by 4.99%. 1% generates about 2.7 million pounds worth of extra income. So if there was a freeze on council tax, just to give you that illustration and to just demonstrate how sensitive this model is, that 25 million would increase by about 13 million. So you'd be up to about 38 or 39 million pounds as a starting point. I always try and bring these figures to life a little bit, because when I just mention big numbers, you know, we can get lost in big numbers, and 25 million is a huge number, but what does it actually represent? So we kind of convert it into, if we had to reduce the number of staff by this amount, how many staff would we need to take out to balance that particular budget problem? Very important for me to highlight, we're not saying this is what we'll do. We're saying we will try and reduce this budget deficit by as much as possible, but to bring these figures to life, if you were looking to take out staff to balance a budget deficit of that size, you'd be taking out about 520 members of staff, and we employ about 2,600 members of staff. So that brings it into context just in terms of how challenging the opening position is, and is likely to get more challenging because of the pressures we're beginning to see this year. And as I say, that assumes a 4.99% increase in council tax at the same time. What we do is we refresh the figures, we go out to all of the directors and all the services, we ask them for efficiency targets and savings, which they then bring into what we call a star chamber process, and they present that information, and it generates lots of options in terms of, to save these amounts of money, to bring in these efficiencies, this is what we would need to do. And that's how we move away from, that's how we begin to bring it back into balance. But it also means that the illustrative figures I've talked about the number of staff that you would take out, we move away from that, and we move into a space where we're looking to cover that deficit through efficiencies coming forward through the services. Some of them might include restructures, but it's generally how can we be more efficient, how can we protect our services going forward to balance a budget deficit of that size. It's something we've had to do for the first 4 years. It's really difficult. It gets more difficult each year. So this will be probably the most difficult budget setting round that we've had. Again, this committee has a fundamental role in that, because you highlight the areas that you want to have a look at, and we delve into those in a little bit more detail. But we have a challenging financial year ahead of us this year, and we have a challenging budget setting round for next year. I'll pause there, Chair.
Right. Any questions for Martin?
Yeah, can I ask a question, Martin, on whatever the other area of demand often has been, to a lesser extent, has been temporary accommodation. I know the numbers are usually much smaller compared to the other two you mentioned, but what's the status of that at the moment?
It's holding its own at the moment. So some of the initiatives that we've brought in have seen it levelling off a bit. So the demand isn't increasing like it has in previous years. So it's not being flagged as a significant pressure in this financial year so far. What we try to do each year is we look at the demand for each of the different services, and we estimate what we think it would do over the next 12 months. And the estimate that we put in for 25-26 when we were setting the budget seems to be holding at the moment. But again, because it's demand led, we don't know how long that would last, but it's not being flagged as a significant pressure at this point.
Can I ask, you mentioned about the national insurance increases in particular in relation to demand services, in particular to adult and children's social care. How about the impact on contracts? Do the contractors, in particular waste ones, do they absorb the increases, or do they reschedule the work? Because obviously from the public's point of view, they want to see the level of collection and the level of street sweeping maintained as it was proved. How does that factor if they're having to deal with the or do they simply put the cost of the contract up and pass it on to you?
I think it depends on the individual contract contractual arrangements and on the service as well.
But the waste ones, which are the critical ones, the environmental cleansing services, which are the absolute critical ones for the public, I think, aren't they?
So Veolia has not passed on those costs. North, because it's a joint venture, we have a responsibility for those costs anyway. And the in-house services, because we're a council, different rules apply. So we've not had to bear those costs.
So the in-house services, then what happens?
We don't have to bear those costs because separate rules apply.
So
Have absorbed them within the existing level of service.
But that's Veolia. I think where the bigger area is going to be in the care side of things, because there's a lot of people there that probably worked 20 hours a week or whatever, and maybe never hit the 9,000 limit, and now are being hit with a 5,000 limit. So I suspect there'll be a lot of people that were maybe even had 2 care jobs, neither of whom paid employers NI, and now going to be caught by the employer on both. That's where I think we're going to see a lot of pressure coming back.
But I think it's probably fair to say that of the pressures that are being flagged at the moment, some of it is national insurance, but the majority of it is just an increase in demand.
Okay.
That makes up the majority of it.
Dave?
With government's announcements, that they take into consideration that council tax will rise by 4.99. So do you have to take all that into consideration? With that?
No, that's your decision.
Yeah.
Government of all colours love to say we will allow councils to put it up by 4.99. When it does go up, and you write to them and say, why did you do that, Rachel? She'll write back and say, it wasn't Rachel, it was that nasty Dave. So it's a constant ping pong between central government and local government all the time, of every colour. They all do it. And when you don't put it up by 5%, they say, well, don't blame us that you're running out of cash because we allowed you to stick it up by 5%. So, and Martin warned you that if you don't do that, you're kissing goodbye to 13 million quid. So you're almost in the jaws of a vice all the time. But it's very much, it'll be a cabinet decision, it'll be a political decision for the administration as to how they want to play it.
Yeah, it's more to do with how you take into consideration your budgeting more than anything.
Yeah, so we assume that we'll increase by 4.99%. I've gone on the record to say my advice will always be that you should maximise your council tax, because if you don't do that, then you can't catch up in future years. And I think when it's been pegged down artificially previously, it's caused problems. It caused problems for the county council previously. So again, my professional advice will be you should always increase council tax by the maximum you can. If you didn't do it on those figures there, sorry, Jonathan, that deficit would increase by £13 million in one stroke.
That's what I was going to say.
But if the administration want to give a political steer that we want to see it with a zero across the board, just let us know and we can project it that way. It's not a problem. That's very much a political. It's not baked in terms of it can't be changed. Any number can be changed, but you just then have to. You just have to work all the harder then to balance. But nothing's baked in.
Yeah, I'd like to understand the assumptions that go into the budget so that we can then maybe scrutinise that, because it's a forecast based on certain assumptions in every aspect of the budget. Yeah.
You briefly mentioned you weren't going to get into period 1, but we're 2 weeks off quarter 1. So when are you going to tell us? When's it going to cabinet?
So I've got an update later this week in terms of where we are. You're right, we're headed towards the end of period 3, which is the end of quarter 1. I think, once I have a better idea of what those mitigations are and what the overall net position is, that's when I'll make you aware. I'm not sure when the next meeting is, Tracy, but okay. I mean, we could do an informal briefing if you're happy to do that once we know the position.
Yeah, so if we're not going to meet to September, you'd be practically the end of quarter 2 by that point. But surely you'll be bringing period 1 to cabinet soon? Is that not going to June?
No, it's end of last
Oh,
year.
year-end outturn.
Yeah.
Okay. You're 306.
This is the calendar year, right? It's not...
Yes, the accounting year's from 1st of April.
Right.
Martin, one quick question, sorry. Ian, does that includes the settlement discussion from last week as well, does it, which was not very much, 2.6 or something?
No, that includes, that's the published data that was in the final budget report that went to full council in February, so it doesn't include any further intelligence since then. Okay. So just to be clear, because that's the information already in the public domain, so all that needs to be factored through in the refresh that we'll do.
Because government are also talking about business rate reset, which could be a big number. There wasn't a lot of new money in the spending announcements last week. Other than they were going to allow the 5% and most likely allow police and crime commissioners even more, I suspect. Well, I suspect they'll be allowed even more to pay for the policing promises that have been made. But, yeah. So on the on the finances, is there anything? Well, we need to be careful. Again, we'll dive down rabbit holes here. Any questions that you have about where we're at with this, or the processes that we have hitherto followed, or ones you want to see followed? Because the other thing is, there's a lot of talk about the Doge ideas. It gives you some idea of the target numbers that you need to try and find. But when's there going to be an output from that? Have you any idea? And are we going to get to see it in here as well?
At this point in time, no idea. I think you're aware that the team visited here on Friday. They were the guests of the leader and the administration. Senior officers were called in late in the afternoon for a very brief discussion. We've had absolutely no request for information at this point in time. We've supplied or provided no information at this point in time. We await the request, and the next steps is where we are.
I'd have thought, Chair, that given that we have the scrutiny function of the finances, of the resources, that we would want to have access certainly to all the same information which is passed over, and we would expect to see some oversight of the process.
Yeah, well, I certainly want to see the output. I'd want to see the product. That's for sure. But and if there's any help that you can do to dig into that, if you really want to get ahead of that, you need to rip 50 million out, which could be a challenge.
I would say that, I think given that you've been very clear about where the problems are, you can say exactly which services it is. If we're going to scrutinise the budget, then we should look particularly at those areas where the pressure points are.
Which is what we've done.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't do children's last year, and that was only because we knew there was a lot of extra work going on. Sarah was in there. They had a raft of improvement processes going through. There was cabinet crawling all over them, asking questions. They had, and I just felt, and the committee agreed, that we should probably, there was little value to be added by asking the same questions of the same people the same way to get the same answers.
And that was the point I was going to make. I understand why you said what you said, but when so much is going on around us, actually, I think it's sometimes the lesser spent services are potentially where we can bring more value, because there's so much going on in adult social care and children's social care that it's not just say, right, well, that's all we need to look at. So I think maybe we focus efforts in other areas depending on some of the outcomes of Doge.
But when we get into budget setting, we can decide where it is we want to look at. We had an attempt in December past to understand, the way I put it at least, the sort of perpetual overspend in adults. So we were, if you look back over the last 3-4 years, it's been 3 million, 5 million, 10 million overspent. Children's likewise. So is that we can't, is there something wrong with our model and forecasting? And it was very difficult again to get to the bottom of it, I think. Fiona?
Question from Martin. Martin, just for a point of clarity, anything that Doge are looking for, am I right in thinking that it is either a available publicly or available through a freedom of information request anyway?
At this point in time, I don't know what they're looking for because they've not written to us yet. So I think once we get their list of requirements, which we've not had, then we can work out what information is readily available. There's a huge amount of information already in the public domain. You know, every item of expenditure over £500 we have to publish on a monthly basis. Contract pipelines are in the public domain. There is a lot of information in the public domain. External audit reports, internal audit reports, they all go into the Audit and Governance Committee. They are debated at length. There is lots of information out there. At this point in time, we've not had the request, so I don't know what information they're looking for at this moment.
Okay. Silas.
Chair, we are where we are with regards to the inherited debt of smashing together various councils. Has there ever been any scrutiny with regards to any lessons identified that we might want to take a look at? And the second question is about the Doge. Whatever it is that they find, I worry about unexpected or unwanted outcomes. So they might come in and go, well, that's a crazy decision, let's just stop doing that and make the savings. But should we let the Doge and the results of it guide our future scrutiny?
Well, hang on. Doge, my understanding is, are going to come in, prepare a report and give that to the administration. What they do with it's up to them. They can say this is a load of rubbish and chuck it in the bin. They can say we found the promised land and go and head in towards it. You know, we don't know. My understanding is it's some sort of in-depth audit. Fine, crack on and do it. I just want to see the product. And one person's waste is another person's essential services, so we just need to be careful.
I might be wrong, but my understanding of audit is that they're checking to ensure that you're staying within the rules, the regulations, the guidance, the boundaries, etc. They're not necessarily asking the question, is it a good decision? And that's what the Doge is going to come in and do. They're going to ask the question, what were we thinking? Was this the right decision? Not, are we within or outside?
Well, audit does do best value reports, though, doesn't it? So it does explore, was it a good decision or was it a good outcome?
Well, good scrutiny should be checking, was the idea as bright as we thought it was at the time, in the light of what you now know? Like, you know, our we're talking about the highways contracts, the waste contracts. You know, we could say there's provisions in there we don't like, but I don't know. I don't know them well enough to know that.
So my logic, thank you, Councillor Harris, is that if the Doge come in and they make recommendations and they're very different to the outcomes of the audits, is some kind of analysis of the difference between the two style of audits worthy, and is it worth asking now the Cabinet, would it be wise for scrutiny to take place before decisions are made? Because if we just go ahead and try to make cuts and worry about the unexpected or unwanted.
Well, we don't have to ask Cabinet to look at things before decisions are made. If we want to, as we were saying with the waste, we can get ahead of that and do, like, well, pre-scrutiny, if you want to call it that. Not a term I like, but we can try and get ahead of that and inform the decision makers or present some data or analysis around that. I welcome anybody that's prepared to come up with ideas as to where savings could be made. You can see the size of the problem, and that's probably understated.
I just think it's probably worth adding that they are not in a position to make those decisions. They might make recommendations, but it will still have to go through the normal processes, which would be Cabinet, scrutiny, any other committee that needs to have.
Well, ultimately, it's a Cabinet decision. If they want to, it'll be Cabinet will recommend a budget to Council. Council will accept or reject the budget. As you got majority control, it'd be unusual for it not to then follow the Cabinet recommendation. But so that should be the process. So, you know, the ideas can come up. If there's a gap, it'll be interesting to see. You know, I don't. We haven't seen any product. We haven't seen any outcome. I've seen headlines, and I'm not really bothered what gets said on social media. But we also need to understand: is it spend or is it potential spend? But I just want to see what they're going to come out, and if there's a different approach, then you know, how do we take it?
Just to add to the other point that you raised around borrowing, and you would have heard Martin talk about borrowing as a legacy issue. There is some borrowing that's over the last 4 years from Western Plans decision making. But again, in terms of hitting and tackling some of these bigger problems, the reality is investing to save might be one of those things that you have to think about. So again, my concern is just saying borrowing is bad is not necessarily the right position, because actually borrowing might be a potential solution to some of the problems. Might be, not saying it is, but I think that's important to frame in the context of thinking as well, because debt isn't necessarily bad. It needs managing, and we already have a lot that we've inherited, but it could be a solution to some of the problems in some areas.
Yeah, because we had the corporate parenting training last week, and the general consensus is whatever you invest in, you know, at the root cause could save an awful lot of money.
Yes.
So if you have to borrow to save, then there's a good business case there.
Well, debt is not a problem, but the sort of amount of it can be. Yeah, so it's...
But that is an issue that we have, that we can't change. That's an inherited position and not amount of that, so it is what it is.
Yeah, I understand, but what we need to do is to look for the ways to reduce that, not to increase that further.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
talked
that's how
in the finance meeting about a burn-down chart, didn't we, to see when we think we might be able to start making inroads to reducing that, because obviously the daily interest charge is money we like to keep.
Which is included within that. So if you wanted to pay off 50 million of debt, you would have to find a way to add another 50 million onto that 25 to generate the surplus to make the repayment.
It's about 10 million on £1 billion, isn't it? Annually, roughly.
That's it, just Martin, can you just confirm, because there are so many different numbers flying around out there, what is our current level of debt and what is the daily or monthly servicing of that?
Yeah, I can.
Even if it's just a ballpark rather than...
Okay. If you just bear with me, I'll find a slide and I'll take you through that, because that will give us the information that I put into the members' information day.
Because there's a lot of conjecture and rumour, and I think let's actually let's get the facts out on the table.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight a number of things. We did inherit a huge amount of debt. The key thing is making sure that the debt that we have got is affordable, so the repayments and the borrowing costs associated with that are affordable. There are good reasons why we need to borrow, so investing to save is a really good reason why we quite often borrow, where we think actually if we invest something in capital terms, we can reduce our ongoing revenue savings, and that saving is greater than the cost of borrowing for that debt that we've taken out, then it makes sense to do that. So we do those invest to save schemes all the time. We support other capital schemes, and there's different categories that we go into to do that. If you just give me 30 seconds, I'll find that figure and come back to you.
But you mentioned there care places from the corporate parenting one. To my mind, that's a racket that's going on there at the moment. We're spending tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds on certain care places, and there was a Competitions and Markets Authority report on that marketplace a couple of years back that was more or less saying the market's broken, and the large investors and hedge funds are ultimately funding this, and the cost places are out through the roof. Now, if we could have our own places, and I've been saying it for 6 years, we need to build 50% more than what we need and sell those to other local authorities, because they want $8,000 a week. Oh, we'll do it for 5. Everyone's a winner. Yeah, I would love to get into that when we get onto as to what is driving. I, for the life of me, can't understand how it can cost that much, even if you did need someone to have 3 or 4 people on a 24/7 supervision. I still can't understand how you get to £1 million a year for some of the really expensive and complex children's places that we have to stump up the bill for.
Is that something this committee has the power to go and scrutinise?
Yes.
The difference with now?
Of course, if we wanted to go down that, we can look into it.
Well, that sounds like a good idea.
Well, we'll be coming on to that in a minute. So the other question I had, Martin, on the reserves that you were saying on the other reserves, does that include the Section 106 and all the planning monies? Is that in there? No. So the planning monies are held separately again?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Martin knows I've currently got a bit of a vehement on it about Section 106.
Who hasn't?
Well,
I think we've got a whole apiary of bees on Section 106.
I think on that, I certainly feel more assured at the moment that things are closer to where they should be than they're not, but I still think that this is something that needs looking at. Whether or not it becomes a separate element for scrutiny, let's see, but it is something that I think needs to happen.
And on that point, we're not there yet, but we have made good progress over the last 4 years on it. We've still got more work to do. Just going back to your borrowing question. So the total amount of borrowing that we've got at the moment, or at the end of 31st of March 2025, so at the end of the last financial year, 679 million, compared to 568 million that we inherited. Really important to split that debt down between two different elements. So of that 679 million, 269 million relates to the HRA, and therefore is funded entirely through the HRA, not the council tax account or the general fund account. So is financed through the rental income stream that we get from the tenants that are in social housing. The general fund debt is 411 million. And then if we come to the cost of borrowing per day, I think the figure, so the total figure, daily cost of borrowing is £56,000 per day. But again, split that into HRA and general fund. HRA financed through the rental income stream is £23,000. The council tax account bears £33,000 per day to service that debt. As I say, the vast majority inherited by West Northants. So they're the figures at the end of last year.
Does that include PFI?
Doesn't include PFI.
Okay.
So that's about, it's a bit over 100% of the revenue budget, isn't it, in terms of value? How does that compare to this kind of ratios for other authorities? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head. I'd need to take that away and give you some more information on that.
Is it sort of in line?
Yes.
It's
At the high end, but in line?
Yeah. It's,
MHCLG will tell you it's well in line.
Yeah.
it's not concerning.
Not. Well, whenever you look at Woking, I think it's Woking,
That was serious.
they've got something like 2 billion of debt, and probably a net revenue of, they're a district, a net revenue of 50 million. I'm absolutely barking mad. But I think there's something that we want to keep an eye on, because I'm feeling a bit aggrieved by some of the emails that you get from MHCLG that tell you about what's going on. Now, I noticed that they had created a fund to give councils who were going through local government reform an amount of money to help them with their restructuring. You know, not all those costs that we had with various consultants with this, that and the other. And when we asked for money back then, we were told, sod off. I also noticed there's, and that's really not that much. I think the most was about 500,000 that Essex was getting. And it was based on population. It was like 20p a head plus an X £1,000. But then there's also talking about debt forgiveness for, I think, Woking. And I think that's because no one's going to touch, they're never going to get Surrey reorganised, because there's two councils down there. I think there's Surrey and Runnymede, and they're both in debt over the neck. And unless there's nobody going to take it on, because I think they'd form the new council and issue at 114 straight away. So that won't work. But if government get into that, and the bit they've always been worried about, they're not that bothered about a few hundred million here, but they're certainly bothered about a few tens of billions out and around the country. And the moment they start saying, we're going to allow this in Surrey, I don't see any reason why the rest of us shouldn't put our hand up and saying, what about ours? You should give our taxpayers a break as well. But that's only like moving money from your left-hand pocket to your right-hand pocket. If you take it off the local taxpayer and put it in the national taxpayer, they'll catch you on the way around the second time round. But nonetheless, our concerns about the West Northants ones, and the government are going to start writing off debt for local government, I think then they're going to be in real trouble there, because everybody else will be saying, well, what about us? Although I don't see in those particular ones they're going to have a lot of, because the new plans won't work. Somebody's going to have to bite the bullet there, but it's not for us. So, yeah. But those PFIs, some of them finish soon, don't they? In the next few years. Right. Anything else on this broad outline of where we're at financially? Probably Martin should take a separate session and go through this offline, or maybe on Teams or Instagram. I don't mind that we just can do it and have our own, our own guide to where we're at, and that line by line, looking at what's building everything up.
Just one other quick question, if I may. It's something I've raised a couple of times, I think, a bit like a broken record, I know, but
Capitalisation.
flash reports or monthly reports, because clearly there is a headline of that, and you never see it until a quarter when it's fleshed out and there's more detail around it. And one of the challenges always for scrutiny and for cabinet, either it's not an issue for cabinet because they see the information. It's an issue for us if you're not in cabinet, because you only see it at that point, and there's always a timing issue. So you're always quite a long way behind the curve on those sorts of numbers. So I guess the question again is there any opportunity for members of this committee to get more of a sense? And I know we've done verbal updates and so on, and that's very helpful, but I think the more information this committee has, the better.
Yeah.
More than happy to do that, but it would be verbal. So in terms of the quarterly reports, that has all the detail in there, and you get that information going into cabinet. The months in between, so the first period, second period, it's at a high level, so we don't go into that level of detail. And when I do the verbal updates, I'm picking up that information from the few slides that I get to set out the latest position. So you've got that. So you've got that information. So more than happy to verbally update on an ongoing basis. What I wouldn't want to do was bring in a regime where we do a full report every month, because that is just very resource intensive to do that.
I get that, I accept that.
But we could do the cabinet MI that they're getting after the close of the meeting in an informal setting, couldn't we? That might be something that we should look at. But I appreciate that you need to have a sanitised report for publication, which is fine. But exactly, but no additional work. Just it doesn't even need to say this committee on it. Just there's what went to cabinet, and we can all see that, or cabinet informally. So I'm conscious of the time, and I let this sort of go because I think we kind of almost, as we went, we stumbled into item 7, development of our committee work plan. So we've had a few ideas chucked out there. I think Tracy's got something quickly as well, haven't you?
Chair, I'll go through this first few slides quite quickly. So obviously this committee, as we've been talking, will need to have its work programme, and it'll have a topic, what the purpose of that topic is. The date will either be, if it's coming to committee, we're not going to have a task and finish group, which is a longer term piece of work, or a spotlight review where you might have 1 or 2 meetings, and that looks at the approach, which we just spoke about, and the invitees. You always get your cabinet member coming along. Your questions will be to your cabinet member, but you will have your executive director there as well, supporting the cabinet member. When you go to task and finish groups, that list of expert advisors, as we call them, is widened, and you'll put a scope together for the task and finish group. You'll find out a bit more about that at the session on Wednesday, which is the training session. So that's the what the work programme is and why. I'll just go to a quote from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. I won't read it out, but it's there on screen for you about what effective work programme is. And look at the last sentence. If it's done badly, it can end up wasting time and resources. So we need to have a good work programme there and make sure it's followed through. So how? It's understanding the role of the committee and its remit, well, we've started to do that. Consider what, why, how and when. Prioritise that work programme, how you want it to go through the year. And keep that work programme under review because it's a fluid document. You might want space for issues that come up during the year that you didn't know about. And if you haven't got time, then something has to slip off. But if it's a work programme where you can include such an issue, that's really useful. And then we go on to the when. So obviously we have the two committees that have previous committees, which was police and corporate. You develop the work programmes in your committee meetings. The Scrutiny Triangulation Group can assist in coordination. They can look at any cross-cutting themes. The work programmes go to that committee for the coordinating triangulation group to look at. That consists of cabinet members, ERT, the chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny committees. The last meeting of Place Scrutiny Committee, they looked at the list of the work programme and suggested possible topics for inclusion on this committee's work programme for you to consider. So obviously you already discussed that, the council's 3 waste contractors and their strategies towards clearing fly tips and littering. Scrutiny input into the council's asset strategy.
Was that about disposals, acquisitions and things like that? Okay.
It was, yes. One of the councillors at Place did suggest scrutiny of national highways, which would be external scrutiny, and scrutiny of external travel, including pedestrian safety and local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. So they were the 4 items that the committee wanted to put forward for yourselves to consider included on the work programme. And then going to the next slide, these are the previous committee, corporate, suggested these items. I did add budget scrutiny onto it, but
that's a standing item.
yeah. But obviously the committee, they did a bit of scrutiny work of innovation work that's going ahead on the 3 pilots. And
So this was mostly artificial intelligence
Yes.
things that were being done. They should be coming to an end by now.
Yeah, and the committee suggested when they have come to an end, this committee might want to look at them further. They had scrutiny input at the beginning of those. Scrutiny input into adult social care scrutiny and the approach of budgeting in respect of adult social care, together with a review of the budgetary process for previous years. Scrutiny of the budget forecasting at the appropriate time and HRA budget setting and the involvement of Northampton Partnership Homes, NPH. Scrutiny input into delivery housing and delivery timescales on the decent home standard and new bills and the reasons for any slippages with the HRA capital programme. And then it's already been discussed already tonight, Section 106 agreements. So they were the items that both committees suggested the committee might want to look at for its work programme going forward.
Okay, and then there's the other stuff we discussed ourselves. So there's enough there for a programme. Pardon? You haven't finished your list? Yeah, I was going to say, that, because I did send an email out saying what the members have in mind. And for each of those, if any of them were going to carry on, you could make a case for every single one of them. But we need to just be conscious of our own time and our own resources and our own ability to do this and have a life outside of this building. So budget scrutiny is a given. That's going to happen, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, towards the end of the year. So we just need to carve out, or bear in mind with this discussion, we need to carve out a chunk of time, December through February, for budget scrutiny. That when we get actively involved, there'll be probably a little bit of time before December where we might get the odd update as to what's going on, but we don't get actively involved until there's a first draft, unless the administration want to change that, which of course they can. But we haven't been that involved with the processes of getting from the minus 25 million to balance. We generally get told, well, they're down to 5 million, they're down to 8 million, but we've not really been except afterwards you say, well, what did you look at, what did you throw out, what did you agree, what did you disagree with?
I'm also reluctant actually, because obviously,
I feel a but coming on. Go on.
well, finance obviously is the lifeblood of us being successful, and I think
Yes.
gauging, you know, how we are in this financial hole, etc. If we did nothing else for the next 3 years, that would be time well spent. But there are other things that I've kind of been listening to amongst the troops, if you like, with regards to some of the apps that are out there, like Fix My Street, any other apps that are out there to try to help. Do we know how effective and efficient they are at actually doing the work and providing feedback?
Fix My Street works, well, in terms of reporting. We got our own West Northants app, which is
Wasn't that an aspect
Which
of
is-
working for the waste? Fly tips were getting reported and nothing was getting through.
I'm not sure. Like I
depends.
think it might depend where you're at. Former South Northants, you report a fly tip, it'll be gone in 48 hours. They're bloody brilliant at Tove Depot. So I do think there's very much a former Daventry South. It depends what contract you're on. The in-house in terms of moving fly tips for the former South Northants, I can only say they're very, very, very good. You know, if we get a problem, and we've had some horrific ones down our way recently. Like literally, I could show you a picture of one that I had cleared the other week. Literally, a lorry load of crap that was dumped at the side of the road.
Horrendous.
And it was gone in, well, 24 hours.
Obviously, us fixing the waste recycling and such that it's less
Unbelievable.
waste.
Unbelievable.
I don't know who can actually see that.
Yes. I think that there's lots of apps. I'm not sure if everybody knows about them.
Yeah.
I've been asking my constituents, they know some of them, they don't know more of them. Those that have put things in, they say it goes to a black hole, but nothing ever seems to happen. I've done a download from my area. Some of them are closed, some are communications, some are just a decision on our area, so then you're thinking, well, what happens now? So people who inputted those things are not getting any feedback. And sometimes years go by before anything seems to happen. And that's just one or two of the apps. I wonder if there should just be one app. We have some kind of a campaign where everybody knows about it and then we monitor it so that everybody gets the feedback. Even if the decision is for us not to take things further forwards. But like I said, in terms of priority, understanding where the money has gone, what we've done wrong, what we could do better, to try and reduce the deficit, etc., would probably be a best use of time, maybe. Question.
Chair, are you expecting to finalise this tonight, or are you finish a discussion? And then
I think we need something in order to plot out where we might want to go, sort of areas we might want to look into.
Because out of the discussions that we've had, I mean, the issue about the contract, renewal the waste contract, looked like that was a really pressing one. Then if we were going to do it at all, we'd have to get moving fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Because we'd be, you know,
But that feels to me that what we need there is a member working group, probably led by Scrutiny, and allow other members, because the waste is,
it's a huge issue.
it's our, I would even say it's even more sensitive than anything else, because it's the weekly calling card that members have, that residents have with the council, is the bins being emptied every week.
It's a one universal service that,
Yeah.
that is really key. The other one is, of course, the finances, which are absolutely critical, and it's quite right that we have to make sure that we hit those and that we keep, that we do the proper scrutiny job on that. The other one's just reflecting on what people have said. I take the point about the large spending areas, obviously being ones that are so big that it can overwhelm the work, but there is a difference between a council which outsources most of its big services, and a council that provides it in-house. And we face a prospect of taking both housing and possibly children's services in-house as well, given, not knowing what's going to happen to the Children's Trust. And if that happens, it's a very different model of council in terms of the way it functions and some of the cost pressures and the personnel and skills you're looking at. And I just wonder if, rather than just looking at the finances of it, and I take your point that you know, you can look at savings in all kinds of ways, but there's a point of looking at the kind of council it is. If it's taking two really major services, if it's going to take them back in the house, that might be a bit too theoretical, but it would certainly be a big change and something to scrutinise. The one we haven't talked about is actually the assets register, and I wonder if, bearing in mind that, you know, some of the issues about cost pressures, that might be an area where we could hit both some of the regeneration targets and goals and look at some of those issues, and also generate some funds, because there have been discussion about the release of quite a few assets, which can be quite controversial, but if, you know, well managed, it could do a lot financially and actually do a lot in terms of regeneration of Northampton, probably other areas too. So that's just some thinking, but I do think it'd be useful to, I mean, I probably, because it's been a long and actually quite a very thoughtful discussion, and it would be good to just reflect again on it before we have to make any final decisions.
So when's our next meeting?
Next meeting of this committee is the 3rd of September.
Okay. Well, that's ages away, but we can do something informally on Teams if we want. So assets is one thing. You always get into this row about, do the council sell an unused building or give it to the local, pick your club, pick your community organisation instead. And then if you sell an asset in, pick your town, should the money for that remain in that town, or should it just go in the general pot? And we'll go round and round in circles on that one. Yeah. Sorry, I think Fiona.
Topics do we think we're looking at? We've only done about 5 max, haven't we, including budget? So
I was going to say, if you,
4 plus 1.
I would have thought if we're going to go more than that, we're going to get into that sentence of scrutiny done badly is a waste of time.
I just think we're not going to do it well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's if
But if we want to set up a working group, it doesn't have to all come from here for a start. We can also reach out to colleagues that are not in this room or not on this committee who might have an interest in waste and ask them to come and contribute. So you don't have to be, also don't have to be politically balanced. So even if you've got an expert from another party who actually knows what they're talking about and can contribute to that, it can add a lot of value. And don't get too worried about that, because the committee will then take the recommendations from its working group. It can still decide to bin them off at that point if it doesn't like them. So you're not being railroaded by the people outside of another party. But for what we're trying to do, it's their expertise and knowledge you're trying to tap into, and not necessarily their political beliefs.
Can I make just a couple of quick points? I thought maybe assets was on the forward plan. I might be wrong.
So what's Cabinet also, because one of the things that we should be also looking at is what's Cabinet looking at.
Yeah.
But what we really want to try to do with Cabinet is to get about 18 months ahead of them, if that's ever been possible.
I think it's on the forward plan in September or November, I think.
Yeah.
But the additional point that I wanted to make, it sort of builds on Sally's point. It is around the children's area, because you know that option of what happens to the trust, should it continue, should it not continue, and that all depends on ratings, reviews, and the rest of it. But I still think this issue of cost and investor save, there's still, in my view, bigger opportunities there.
Yeah.
And given that it is one of those areas that gives us a huge amount of pressure, I mean, most of the others we've sort of talked about in some shape or form, but that's the one that I would feel quite passionately about. Well,
I personally don't see the point of getting into a discussion about do we bring children's services back in-house until they get the statutory direction removed. That's a very academic conversation, so that's a pointless conversation. So I wouldn't get into that one, but in terms of the placement costs, I would dearly low, and how the hell do you spend £1 million a year looking after a child? I would love to know the answer to that question. I'm sure there are high costs for people with high needs, but how do you spend that much money?
So I think just before, I think we're probably all in a very similar place in thinking about that, but I also know that there's a huge amount of work that has already gone into trying to look at that, so I think it would be interesting. We've never seen what the outcome of that looks.
Yeah.
It would be really interesting and useful to see the outcome of that, to see if that almost satisfies our thinking. Even if we don't agree with it, it might satisfy our thinking before saying, well, let's go down that route when the work's already been done. So is that
Have we done work on that area?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
We haven't. At that
I mean,
point.
the former committees, who did it?
There was a scrutiny piece of work on fostering specifically.
There was, but it wasn't
Balancing.
just that. I think this is one that we can maybe just talk to Fiona Baker about, because I am certain that there was a piece of work done on the cost of placements and why some of them are so high.
Right. Well, yeah, I'd like to see that, and then.
I haven't seen, I think if let's, I could take that as an action. I don't mind, and see,
Yeah.
See if that information is there.
As we all deliberate what the highest priority things are to scrutinise, is there something at a national level that shows how well scrutiny panels have performed? Is there like a super model out there that we could tap into? There's no one single unit that sits and scrutinises everybody and sees who's doing well.
It's a centre for scrutiny.
Yeah, the Centre for Scrutiny and what do they call themselves this week? Governance and.
Scrutiny. If you ask the question, they say everyone's got pockets of best practice. Nobody actually does the whole lot as they recommend as best practice.
Yeah.
I've asked them that question quite a few times in the past.
But the select committee model at the House of Commons is not a bad one to follow. The problem is we don't have anything like the resource they have. And even they would probably argue they don't have the resource they want either. So.
Before we make a decision, would it be wise to get a hold of those individual best practice things and make some decisions based on that? If there's good information out there about what they think works well, and they want things from
They're mostly, though, around how you go about doing it and the process of doing it, as opposed to saying you ought to look at potholes or children's care or planning. They'd say what you need to be doing is be focused, be, know your outcomes, know what you want to do. Because one of the criticisms was made of us in the past, and I would say it was very fair, was that I think the term they used was don't attempt to boil the ocean. That sort of, you could take one of these and they're massive, big subject, and you're never going to touch. So if you're going to say we're going to look at planning, you really need to bring that down and say, is it Section 106 agreements within planning? Is it the performance of planning? Is it planning policy? It all falls within that great big name of planning. And the same with children's. You could look at the cost of placement, or you could look at, you say, well, we're going to look at the whole of the performance of the children's department. Well, that's just going to be such an amount of work, and it would also really tread all over the toes of the other committee. But within that, we're not that bothered. But we'll be more of a concern on the finance side. I suspect there'd be people of the Children's Committee that would probably even think that I was a heretic for even raising the fact that I'd be concerned at the cost, because their overriding consideration would be that that person needs to be looked after, and hang the cost, just find the money. So finding a balance between those two is where we need to be.
Suggest to Tracy, it may be worth sharing, because we did have a scrutiny review, and I know it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we should share that.
Yeah, it should be shared, because we have had them come in and review our scrutiny approach. In fact, we've already changed what they're recommending, because we've gone back from 4 committees.
Well, yes and no. I think there's a.
So, but it's worth looking if we can get it shared, because we've sort of had some of that work done.
Yeah.
I think we've got to be careful just to not keep reinventing the wheel. We spend a lot of time re-looking at something that has been looked at maybe in the last 12 months or the last 2 years. I'm not saying that's a reason to not do it if something has changed. But I think we just need to be careful in what we're spending our time on.
So on section.
So it sounds like there's a gap in the market nationally. If there was data of time, what in terms of improving services or saving money or whatever, then there's some real potential learning there. But it doesn't sound like we've ever monitored
Tracy?
or shared.
Through you, Chair, it's going to council actually the next meeting, but there have been scrutiny committees produce an annual report, and that shows the good work they've done over the year. So every year the committees will send their annual report to council.
Does that get amalgamated and analysed and then shared for good practice?
No, but quite often the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, that's how they pick up on work, because they do see the annual reports or they do see published reports from councils. They don't invite you to actually submit information to them. Many years ago they did ask you to submit their review report, but they don't have that facility any longer.
And there are networks of
Yes.
you know, to pass on good practice, LGA peer reviews and LGA scrutiny training. East Midlands Council do their own bits. In fact, I think they had a meeting here last week.
It's
This
coming
week?
Friday.
This coming Friday, yeah.
I did invite the whole, this committee
Yeah.
to that as well.
Well, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, isn't it?
10 o'clock
Yeah.
here in this room, because budget scrutiny is first on the agenda, so I thought it might have been quite useful to the committee.
Yeah. Anyway, what do we want to possibly look at? Like, we don't have to make a decision tonight, but if we don't make a decision, we won't have anything going on in terms of our own work plan development for autumn.
Can we do the waste contract?
So start looking at waste. Well, I think that needs a working group that would probably run for 6 months.
Start of a 10. Sometimes it's easier
Yeah.
to not edit a blank page, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. Throw something at us, then,
So
Fiona.
here's 7 I'm just going to throw at you. From the things that we've all talked about, these are in no particular order or preference, it's just as I've been typing. So tourism and events, I think it's possibly one that extends beyond that. It's about the scrutiny of what is it we are trying to make West Northants and that element of sitting in it. Next one is regen, but I think there are elements of asset management that we can include in that, because I think it's part and parcel in some areas. Local plan, budget obviously, the waste contracts, section 106, and depending on timing, in-house versus outsourced for a number of elements. But that one might be that one might be.
Well, I think on waste contract, I would certainly think
that comes with the waste one.
in-out will be in-house or out of house will be a big part of that.
Yeah, I'm talking about anything else. That new in-house or out-house for waste just comes into the waste element. But look, there's a start of 7. And
Yeah.
it's almost like which ones we want to move up, which ones don't we, which don't we agree with. But I think if we could just
Yeah, that's a reasonable starting point. Any, Jonathan Scott?
The last one is too big.
Which was that one?
and it might need to go to next year.
The one about in-house,
Yeah.
I think that it needs to be a bit more specific.
What, the in general discussion? Yeah.
I still feel, we know children's is one of our big costs, notwithstanding the work that's been done, and I think that, for me, will shift my view one way or the other. If there's loads of work that's been done on
Exactly.
it, and the answers are already there, but I haven't seen them. I haven't seen any manifestation of that. So that one would still feel quite high at least for me, personally. There's external factors to that, there's market pressures, market conditions, but I think everyone knows that that's a problem. Nobody's really tried to tackle that, and we can't fix it on our own, but we can mitigate some of those costs potentially by doing things in a different way. And I think, Jay, you said before, I think you said it tonight, one option is that we can provide some service to other councils, possibly at better rates, and become a competitor to some of those people that are charging extortionate rates. So I just think that's got cost benefit potentially, could even be a revenue stream.
They were similar to the one which I said, but with the addition of the events. And I'm not sure so much about the events. I take the point it can be something that can be done quite quickly, maybe, but it's perhaps not got quite the potential that some of the others have. I put assets higher up because I think asset management is an area that can impact regeneration and can also impact the budget. The others, obviously, I agree with. The other one that we haven't spoken about is actually flood scrutiny, which is specifically on our list. And that's one that, I mean, it affects my ward, it affects the town centre, but it's also one that when it does come up, it comes up very sharply, and everybody says, well, why hasn't the council done anything about it? And we know that there are some particular pressure points, like what happens about getting up the road and such like. And it could work, and also what happens about some of the, some of the stuff in St James. So
Yeah, well, there's flooding issues right across the district, like King Sutton, my own ward,
that could work,
Toaster.
that it would be worth keeping as a slot, so we can fit it in at some appropriate time, preferably when it rains.
Or before.
Or, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's sort of seasonally.
Oh, yeah. So, crack on.
Some lay person is going to say anything today, I promise. There's some learning maybe that we could take from other industries,
Yes.
like high-risk industries, nuclear, rail, and in particular aviation, where you take a risk-based approach and a benefits-based approach as well. We've got very experienced people in the room who've come up with some really sound arguments for things for us to take a look at. But in a lot of organisations, it's whoever shouted loudest or shouted last that seems to get the money. And there's no real logic behind it. And this committee has an opportunity to pull all of this stuff together in a single working group, look at all the benefits, increase the number of people with experience who've done this before, whether they be officers or councillors, and use some kind of a matrix to put a rough score on it. And that's the thing about risk management, particularly when human beings are involved. For things like this, you could come up with a 10 to the minus figure of its failure, but with humans, we're all built differently, nature versus nurture, etc. If we had something that we could call upon to identify which is top right on the matrix that we absolutely have to deal with now by having some proper time to analyse it, and we had a matrix to use, you could be taking best practice from lots of other industries and then have a logical argument as to how and why we're going to do what we're going to do.
Martin?
It's probably worth circulating we do have a risk management strategy. We do have the matrix that you talk about, which takes all the key risks that we're facing as an organisation, the big strategic risks, and it plots it on a matrix which shows which are in the top right-hand corner. That's considered by the Audit and Governance Committee, but there's no reason why it couldn't come in or be circulated to you, because hopefully most of the discussions you've had tonight will appear on that risk register, I think, from memory. So the Children's Trust is on there, for example, the financial management is on there, for example. There's a whole range of risks on there which we've touched on this evening, but for completeness, it might be worthwhile circulating that to committee members just so you're aware what's already available and the work that's taking place on it.
Well, it could be a good guide.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at it, but last time it was mostly those sort of things around, what if.
Yeah.
Actually, you're better placed than I am to know that, but managing them down with a score, likelihood and impact and, and a number.
Councillor Keeble saying about what have the council done about flooding, etc. I think that would be a good approach.
Yeah.
I think most of them will be on there.
So where are we going to go then with, let's just try and bring this back, where are we going to go with the things that we want to do? I think we want to do something on getting ahead of looking for issues and options around potential waste strategies. I won't say any more than that. So we're not prejudicing the outcome about in-house versus outsourced versus hybrid. And I think that's going to need a working group set up in its own and just let that trundle along in the background almost.
Yes, and I do have a list of members, including members of this committee, that I can share with you, Chair.
Right. Yeah, because I suspect there'll be a lot of people will raise their hand as be a potential person to, and I think it's also important that we get the whole of the district covered, because, you know, the residents up by, I can never remember the part of Northampton, up towards the cricket ground, we got rows of terraced housing, possibly. But if you give them a black bin, a blue bin and a grey bin, where are they going to put it? So that's fine, but if you're in rural South Northampton, they can easily accommodate, you know, a black bin, a blue bin and a red bin, a pink bin and any other colour bin you want to give them, because they've mostly got gardens. So we need to think about that. But we need to make sure that we have a complete district coverage, that these sort of things, I will remember what might work in the terrace houses will never, well, sorry, the other way around, what might work in the villages will not work in the terrace streets, and so on and so forth. So, and it needs to be a system. So if we, I think there's consensus around that we should be looking at that as a separate, that. So then what do we want to look at? Section 106 keeps coming up. I don't know whether any of our newer members have had this, but it's a constant perennial thing around where does the money go. So when an application goes through, particularly the bigger ones, some of them it's formulaic, so it'll say X £1,000 for 3-bed and Y £1,000 for 2-bed, and equals an amount of £463,211 for libraries, or whatever the number is. Where does that then go? Is it the Toaster Library, the library in town? Is it one closest to where the development was built, or does it just get chucked into the pot and nobody really knows what Martin does with it? Is the concern, Dave?
So what I tend to hear about that is mainly parish councils.
Yes.
Who's hoarding the money, so to speak, and they're collating it into certain areas. So the area that's being affected doesn't necessarily see that money.
Yeah, and there are other issues, like, and I'm not going to do ward work here, but there's a continual issue where, to be fair to planning, they've put in 106 agreements an amount to be spent for health provision, and sometimes to be said to be spent in Dr. X's or the local health centre, and then the NHS, whoever they may be, say, oh, we don't want to do that. We don't want to spend that money on that on that particular surgery. We want to spend it in one miles away. I think, but we built 100 houses here. That's the nearest doctor's surgery. That's where the money should go. And they said, no, we're not going to spend it there. And like, I'm aware of my own ward of potentially £100,000 that might expire, and the risk that it could be called back by the developers because it hasn't been used because of this issue, complicated by the fact it's also over the river, so it's in a different, it's not Northants, it's Bucks. But I'm not getting into ward work. But I know we've had similar issues with health monies in particular, and I do think there's an issue that we need to try to get under. You're looking at me whizzingly there, Sally.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, I mean, I think I think Section 106 is a hugely bigger topic than we've sort of discussed so far.
It is.
You know, really good use of Section 106 could have transformed Northampton Town Centre, and then you can get the contributions in from a wider area, because you can make the argument about the benefit it brings to the town. For example, the whole of the South Bank walk in London was developed through Section 106 agreements got by Southwark Council, and we did a High Court challenge to make sure that we could get people from right across the area to contribute to it. And the amount of money that generates for the borough, the amount of jobs it created, and the way it transformed the South Bank was exponential. And that was through careful use of Section 106. So, I mean, I think there's a huge debate to be had about Section 106 and the way it has and hasn't been used in Northampton. But I think it might be a bit it's a bit like some of the discussion about the child trust, you know, the children's trust, and the bringing Northampton Partnership Homes in-house. It's a bit big, starting from where we are right now, and it covers some really major strategic policies of how it sees the planning development in Northampton and indeed other areas as well. So that's my touch with on it.
I think you have a specific point. There's a current issue as well, I think, isn't there?
Well, I think, you mentioned the parish council. Well, most of the parish councils, certainly the ones I get involved with, they're aware that there was a development, there was a Section 106 agreement drawn up. Where's the money? And I'm aware of issues with various ones that, and it's very difficult to get coherent answers out of planning. Planning seemed to blame finance, finance seemed to go back to planning, and it's always difficult to know where it is. Then some of them also have conditions of a sort, that they have to be used for specific things. Some of them are quite narrow, and then some of them are so broad, and then getting somebody in this building or another building to agree that what's going on is the right thing, and then they layer on their own rules and regulations almost as if because they can. But that's a personal opinion.
So if I might on this one.
Crack on.
And I can see Martin's smiling. Might be on my
It's
phone.
gone after.
So,
It's gone after 8. So.
yeah, that I've actually had some enlightening conversations, positively enlightening conversations about it in the last 2 weeks. And that's not to say I still don't believe in these scrutiny. I do. But actually, I think part of what is being caused of a lot of the furor around this is misinformation.
It could well be. Misinformation. It could well be.
And I think that with the correct information actually out there, which I've now been enlightened with some of it, and I've probed for some more, and it seems that the parish councils, I've got 10 at the moment in utter uproar because of Junction 50. So I'm right in the middle of that. And I think just with some of that misinformation just being corrected, it will actually calm some of the situation. But that needs to come out, which working with Steph, and I know that others are. And I still think it does need scrutiny. But now seeing what I have seen from it, I'm not sure that the scrutiny is almost as overwhelming as some people think it might be on this subject.
Okay.
I'm interested in that section 106.
Correct.
I have to say.
Yes.
Pardon, what was that?
We're both thinking we just need a bit more teasing out.
Well, yes, I can accept that. Except I've been told it's going to be teased out over the last 4 years, and we inherited a mess, and
I've not held back, have I?
you get the same old, Daventry was useless, the borough was slightly better, South Northampton was a wee bit better still, none of them were brilliant, and we're still trying to untangle this. At what point, you're going to have to do something about it. But my bigger concern is also what goes into those formulas. Why is there so many variations between them? Why do we track one by one index and another one by a different index? All sorts of stuff like that. And it might well just be to do with the quality of the lawyers that negotiated the thing.
And some legacy.
Some of it's legacy, but they might have been asked, but I've never seen a definitive list of answers.
Yeah.
And why is it, some of the questions I asked a year ago are still not answered.
I couldn't agree with you more, but like I said, I genuinely...
I put that mostly down to the uselessness of the planning department. But
I've been pleased with what I've been hearing, at least this last few weeks. We just need to tease the rest of it out and then get that actually communicated out, and then I think further questions will flow from that.
okay, so I think what we're saying, jump in if I'm not getting this right. You want to delay 106 for a bit longer? No? Oh, okay. Because there was something going to audit. Did that ever go to audit? Because that's what held us back. A wee while ago, we were going to do something, or there was a head of steam building, and then we were told, there's something going to audit committee that was supposed to go in November, and I think it got delayed until February or March. But I don't know if it ever went there, or what their outcomes were, or what they were looking at.
So I think the internal audit report on Section 106 went into the Audit and Governance Committee. I think the internal audit report on Section 106 went into the Audit and Governance Committee previously. In terms of what's been spoken about tonight, I think it breaks into two elements. One is the, I guess, strategic use of Section 106s,
Yeah.
which Councillor Keeve was referring to. And the second one is, what have we got at the moment? How are we monitoring them? Are those arrangements working or not? And we could certainly give you that information for you then to go into in a bit more detail. But I think it breaks into those two elements. One, strategic use, probably too big to look at. Second one being, how do we monitor the agreements already in place? What approach do we take? And then that will tease some more questions out of that, I would have thought.
So should we just have an agenda item about that? How we're doing it, what we're doing, what sums are involved, how many have we got, who's managing it, and then decide if we want to take that somewhere else as a separate piece of work, whether we're scared or satisfied by whatever we get told. Right, okay.
I mean, interestingly,
Sorry, Sally.
Can we also look at the total amount of money spent? Because one of the issues, I mean, I take the point that the strategy, the strategic level might be too much for this committee. However, if you look at the amount of money that's spent, that's spent in Section 106 agreements, added up, it might actually come to a huge amount.
It does.
Say, well, rather than spend it on this and that.
I saw it last week.
Did you?
Yeah,
How much was
it's
it?
there. If I'm going to recall, it was 60 million.
Well,
That's big numbers.
But there are different things in different pockets.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, this information is now starting to come
Okay,
to the fore,
so
and I think that
I disagree with you about the strategic thing is not what we should be doing. I would say strategic stuff is what we really ought to be doing. I'd disagree. I'd say strategic stuff is exactly what we should be doing, rather than diving down the rabbit hole and saying, how did you spend 50 grand?
it's also not on the risk register, just saying. It's actually, so it's interesting that it's gone to audit because it's not on the risk register. But
Don't know. But I know there was something going on in audit, which was what held us back in the previous administration around taking it on as a project, because I didn't want duplication of effort. But okay, but maybe we should just have that as an agenda item. Is that going to be, well, it should be available then for September, around what we're doing in 106, and then from that we can then decide whether we think we want to explore that in greater depth, or we're satisfied there's somebody doing something. So we got waste, we got that.
We have asset management budget and the children's placement and the flooding.
Right. Asset management, again,
is it on the full page?
there has been a report before on asset management, and if my memory's right, we had about 950 odd individual assets.
what do you think we need to scrutinise on it?
Well, I was just noticing that it was up there.
The strategy for disposals, acquisitions, and
Have you got the full plan there?
What do you want to look for?
Let's see if there's anything on assets coming up, because I thought I'd seen something.
Okay.
yeah, I'm just conscious of the time. We need to get through this. Oh God, yeah, the car park. What time's that close?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, right. So we're going.
Take those
So-
ideas away and work in a piece of work.
Yeah, that might be the better idea. If we put those together as some sort of skeleton one, we can have a quick Teams meeting about it.
Yeah.
And I possibly think we do need to have a Teams meeting anyway about getting into the budget, because I'm particularly interested, and I also think all of the subs should attend that, because what I want is for Martin to go through how he does the budget, or at least we've got some idea for everybody knows what it is the hell they're looking at. So I keep making the point, I know people will laugh at me, and Martin certainly will, you know, brackets are good, but until you get in your head that local government accounting is back to front to what people might be used to in outside of these four walls, when you see a massive number in a bracket in business, you generally want to get rid of it, whereas here you want to build it up. So it just simple stuff like that we just need to communicate with people, because otherwise they'll put the emphasis on the wrong side of the wrong side of the line.
And the flooding?
Well, flooding, I'm more than happy to but again, what I think we probably need, like the others, is to have a report on it, what we're doing, and then we can decide whether we think it's going to provoke further dares. Are we happy with that? You're looking at me quizzically there, Silas. Don't worry about that. I don't know why you were here when I said you're not upset me.
Sorry.
But feel free if there's something. I don't want you leaving here and then saying, I wish to God I'd said.
I mean, I mentioned the risk-based approach. You've got a whole list of things to look at. You know, on the one hand, there's, let's look at the biggest financial things first, but also, what happens if things go wrong if we don't look after infant death and things like that. So that hasn't been mentioned again since the put forward, so I don't know if that's gone into a black hole or if you're considering it or anything.
So
No.
where we left it was, and I've sent an email to the former cabinet member, I've sent it while we've been sat here. We're going to find out if that piece of work has already been done, because if it has, there's no point in us reinventing the wheel. So I think we need to wait and decide whether we include that to see whether this piece of work's been done or not.
Which piece of work are you talking about?
Cost of placements we were looking at.
I was talking about a risk-based approach for what it is we're
Right.
going to be, what we're going to be looking at. Martin said he was going to send us matrix.
So I will send you around the risk strategy that we've got and the risk register that we've got at the moment. That's managed and looked after through the Audit and Governance Committee. So they have responsibility for risk management. So that's where that information goes into. Now, more than happy to circulate that information to you, but in terms of the overall strategy and how those risks are managed, that's dealt with through the Audit and Governance Committee rather than through Scrutiny.
Have you ever seen a risk matrix and a risk register-based approach for a scrutiny committee and what they're going to look at before?
Not coming into a scrutiny committee, but what we do see are the 12 or 15 risks that we think are most likely to affect the authority and the run of their services, and that's managed through audit and governance rather than through scrutiny.
Okay. Yeah.
Chair,
Right.
the last one, yes, asset strategy is at 15th of July cabinet.
Right. Okay. Well, that'll be too soon for us to do anything about it. Well, that'll be interesting to see.
What they say.
See what they say, and then we can.
We need to be forward.
Yeah. We can see what they're at. I wonder, is that going to be a change strategy, or is that just going to be an existing strategy rolled forward?
Yeah, one of Jonathan just got the risks up, and the second highest is the council stock, MPH.
Yeah. It should be.
So just to be clear, sorry about this, but there is a risk register.
Yes.
It's right, it's obviously, something a big risk that we need to look at, but that might actually already be what we call as low as reasonably practicable, and there's no point scrutinising it because it's already been scrutinised. I'm talking about a risk-based approach to what your limited resources has to look at, so that you've got an argument, whether you need it or not, to say, we prioritise this first, then that, just a risk-based approach. But that means that we probably need some kind of training on how to do that. For whatever it is we as a committee decide to take a look at. I'm not just talking about should the scrutiny committee look at the top right risk on there, because that might already be kind of really well looked after. You can't reduce it in the likelihood of consequence, so why scrutinise it? Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. It's a subtle difference, but it's a risk-based approach to what is this committee going to look at and why. Not should we look at the top risk that's already there.
Yeah, well, you're right, because the latter one definitely falls in the remit of Audit and Risk Committee in any event. Dave?
Some of this responsibility on that, they've got this training coming up, and part of that training will go into some of that, where you have to define key objectives and such, and form part of your risk-based analysis on that, surely. Well, I say we've got the training coming out next Wednesday, isn't it?
I don't think that's the same.
Do you want to say something?
Isn't it? One of those?
So, yes, through you,
Tend to wind this up,
some
haven't we?
training this coming Wednesday, and it's looking at suggesting items for scrutiny using the scrutiny framework, using the form you fill out if you are suggesting something for a committee to look at, and you'll do, as you'll see from the email I sent out today, there's fictitious scenarios for you to use to actually look at that.
That's not what you're...
I don't know what
Well, we have that training. So if we work on a draft sort of ideas from where we've got, I did say at the chair's training, Tracy was very good at knocking our deliberations into English. Big challenge tonight, mind. and then we'll leave it there and circulate something in the next few days.
And comment.
Oh, well, absolutely. There's nothing fixed. And I do think we need to get a Teams meeting or something, or maybe in person, that we can just get to know each other as well. That might, that we can go through, and particularly so that we go through not the budget, but our working papers, so people know what the heck they're looking at. And I would like the subs, if they wish to come, because then if somebody, what I don't want is that somebody comes into sub, and then we have to have a remedial class for that person, because they what's that number mean? So it would be useful that if there is somebody subbing in, they can pop along, and at least they can get with the programme as quickly as everybody else. So anything else then? Or shall we close it there? It's run on a bit longer than I expected. But
Can we just go through the points?
yeah, Fiona will email them.
We had
Well, what are we typing there, woman?
We had waste, we had the budget.
Yeah.
We had
Budget waste, section
budget
106.
waste, section 106, we had flooding, and we had asset register, and then we had the possibility of the children's as well. Children's places.
I still believe that there is an element to do with tourism, because unless we put that in as part of region.
Yeah, put that in as part of the job.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Well,
It goes well together, doesn't it? At the end of the day, region doesn't have to be a project, it can be an event, it can be a...
That's right.
And did you?
Yeah. Well, I think we don't need to do it now, but I certainly think events and leveraging events is the future of the town centres. The idea they're going to be shopping centres is gone.
Yeah.
They're going to be different, and we also need to think about how we leverage the events that we currently have. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to have the Grand Prix in Silverstone. There'll be 150,000 people down there. Go into Toaster on that Friday night, the town will be dead. But there's 150,000 people literally down the road. And we need to try to find a way of, I don't know what that might be. A bus maybe that would bring a few bus loads of people into Toaster, into Northampton, back again, pick them up in Toaster, back to Silverstone, just running around, or down to Brackley, the other side of the road closure. I don't know would it work. But
Events you could put on, there's loads of things you could put on. You could put a giant screen on there in the square.
You could,
have
yeah.
your own bars instead of rented bars,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, and you make money from it.
I was in Barcelona this time last year when the Spanish Grand Prix was just about, and Barcelona, the big square, was getting all kitted up for, part of the Grand Prix. Now, the Grand Prix is about 25 miles in Barcelona city. It's certainly a lot further away than Northampton Town Square to Silverstone. But we don't seem to leverage that either with that sort of kind of thing. Maybe we just don't have the weather, but
Do you want me to
anyway.
recap?
Yeah, recap.
Okay, so this is where I think we got to. Regen, that also, but we're going to need to look at the scope of that, which also includes sort of community-based areas and also sort of tourism events. It's not just about buildings and regen and projects. Local plan, flooding, children's, possibly depending on whether the work has already been done or not, budget, three waste contracts, section 106.
That's more than enough to keep you going for 12 months.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'll send you the
All right. You send me a summary of that. We get Tracy to knock it into shape. And I think we're done then, aren't we? There is no items of urgent business. So